Okay, guys, so now we're ready to start on the brain, and the brain has 100 billion neurons. That's a whole lot of neurons to store a whole lot of stuff and get that stuff where it needs to go. There's 10 to 50 trillion neuroglia cells. Remember, those are the cells that are supportive, that help fight infection, that create the blood-brain barrier, create myelin sheaths. It weighs about 3 pounds. Remember, that's not the whole skull, that's only the brain itself. And there's four major parts of the brain. It's the brainstem, the diencephalon, and the cerebrum and the cerebellum. If you look at this picture on the PowerPoint, it shows you some. So let's look at it. Okay. Here's the cerebrum. All of this right here is the cerebrum. Think about your thinking part of the brain. This is the diencephalon. You cannot see the diencephalon from the sides. It can only be seen if you cut the brain mid-sagittally in half. Okay, so this would be the right hemisphere of the brain here. Okay, so this is the diencephalon, and here, this is part of the diencephalon too. This yellow right here is the brainstem that connects directly with the spinal cord. And this bottom portion that is totally separate from the cerebrum itself is called the cerebellum. Here's a real brain and what it looks like. And I think I have another picture. Let's see if I can get to it. Okay, this shows you kind of the outside. This is the cerebrum right here. This is the cerebellum. Here's the brainstem that you can see. And here you cannot see the diencephalon from the outside of the brain, only when you cut it inside. Okay, so what does the brain do? It does an awful lot. It requires 20% of all of our oxygen. So if blood flow stops, what happens? You go unconscious. That's like when people don't get enough oxygen to their head. A lot of times they'll faint, things like that. If you go without oxygen to your brain, you only have about 4 or 5 minutes before cells start to die. Also, there's no glucose storage, so there's no way for it to get energy and do the things it needs to do. So you get confusion when you get low glucose, you get dizziness, convulsions. I always think the best example of this I've seen is on Steel Magnolias, whenever the daughter's fixing to get married and her glucose is bottomed out and she gets real confused, real shaky, wandering. The mother gets up and she gets an orange juice so that she can get her glucose back up, and then she feels better after that. So blood glucose is important, and oxygen is really important for the brain. Again, just like we spoke in the very beginning of the chapter, it has meninges. Remember, it has the dura mater next to the skull, the arachnoid mater, and then between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater is the subarachnoid space, and it has the cerebral spinal fluid. Remember, also for protection against chemicals, it has the blood-brain barrier that's formed by astrocytes. We talked about those in the last chapter. It keeps harmful things out like toxins and chemicals, but remember, drugs are chemicals, so it keeps those things out too. So whenever something's affecting our central nervous system, the doctors have to be sure that it can pass that blood-brain barrier. Things that do pass the blood-brain barrier very easily are lipid-soluble things, like think of fats and everything like that. Remember, oxygen, carbon dioxide are small, so they go through very easily. So does glucose, obvious, because we have to get glucose into it. And alcohol, which is lipid-soluble. So that explains why it affects the nervous system and our brain so much whenever we drink alcohol. The cerebral spinal fluid that is formed by the epithelial cells and in the ventricles is clear, colorless liquid. Remember, it is a superfiltrate of blood, essentially. So it has glucose and oxygen and the nutrients the brain needs, and it carries the waste out, such as carbon dioxide. Whenever we think about the circulation, as it constantly moves around in the meninges and through the brain, so it has a specific pathway. Remember, ventricles are the spaces that are in the brain itself. So let's look at the spaces real quick of the brain. If you look here, These are the lateral ventricles. There's two of them. And you cannot see that from anywhere in the brain except if you take a transverse section. They look like ram's horns. And then they are connected to the third ventricle. The third ventricle you can see is right here, and it's actually right here, bigger. It actually is in the middle of the diencephalon, and it is connected to the lateral ventricles by the interventricular foramen right here. The third ventricle is connected to the fourth ventricle through the cerebral aqueduct right here, and the fourth ventricle actually is between the brainstem, the pons of the midbrain, and the cerebellum. So if you look at this picture, you can see the flow. The flow starts back here. If you go here, you can see all of them are connected. The flow actually starts at the coracoid plexuses in the third ventricle and then goes all the way through to the arachnoid villi. So what I'm going to do is take you through this real quick. Remember the coracoid plexuses. You take the capillaries and filter them out through the epithelial cells. Remember they have cilia, so filtration and secretion starts pushing it through the spaces of the brain and the spinal cord. It goes to the fourth, all the way around to the subarachnoid space, and then is reabsorbed in the arachnoid villi. So if you look here, here is the cerebral spinal fluid being formed, and it goes through here and starts to circulate around. Now you remember the subarachnoid space goes all the way around the spinal cord, so it literally flows circular as it goes through. Also, you can see that it can go down that central canal that's in the spinal cord. So it can go there, go to the bottom, swirl around. So it's not like a circulatory system like we think of in the blood, all going in one direction. This goes in multiple directions. So it'll eventually go through the fourth ventricle, down the spinal cord, come up and around the brain, and goes back to the top part of the brain. And these right here are the arachnoid villi. If I go back and I look at the very first PowerPoint slide, it has a better picture of the subarachnoid villi. If you look right here, see those little tree structures, that's the arachnoid villi, and that goes back into the circulation right here that is close to the dural sinuses, and these spaces right here with the darker blue are the dural sinuses, and it goes back into the circulation, and then it all starts over again. We make 80 to 150 milliliters a day, and as soon as it's made, it is circulated around, and then it's reabsorbed back into the circulatory system. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about are the 4 parts of the midbrain. There's actually 3 parts of the midbrain, sorry, but we're going to talk. I said that. Forget everything I just said. Next time we're going to be talking about the brainstem. 3 parts. See you guys later. Bye.